So I'm just going to create a very simple mass object and then load it into a project to show you how you can use the by face options for creating walls and floors, for example, and roofs. This is the mass environment you get here by clicking on the application button and then new conceptual mass, and then this metric mass should be the only thing that you've got. Unless I saved this as a template, then I've only got the basic metric mass. So if I say cancel to that, because I've already got this open, and then inside this mass environment I've got a work plane level 1, and I've also got a work plane side to side and front to back. So I don't know which one's which, but that's what we get. And these are pinned, so you can't move them unless you unpin them. Also, I have a project which I've created. Now I've created an arrayed sort of series of levels. So these are grouped and associated at the moment. I'll probably ungroup them later on by just selecting them all and then ungroup. But for the moment, if I want extra floors in, then for example, I can just click on this value and say I wanted 15 floors. I can type in 15 and that's going to create 15 floors for me, as opposed to the 10 that I probably need. So I'll just take that back to 10. So that's a very useful function. And also notice that only the bottom two are blue, so they have level 1 and level 0 associated with them. These ones, which are black, don't have floor plans associated to them yet. If I wanted to do that, then the View tab, Plan Views, and then choose the type of plan view that I want, and then select the levels that I want to associate that floor plan with. So I'll be doing that a little bit later, possibly, but for the moment the levels are still going to work. They just haven't got any visual associations with floor plans in the project browser. So let's pop back over to our mass, and we're going to use this base and we're going to copy this up, sort of two versions of it. So I've got one that will be 20 and then another one will be another 20 above that, and we'll use these as basic levels where we can create shapes and then make a mass object from. So I can do that by clicking on this reference plane, and then when I see the little sort of move symbol, if I press my finger on the control key and click and hold on the left mouse button, I can drag up a copy of that to a new position. And when I let go, it's given me a value here. Now if I click away from it and it's disappeared, then select it again and just change this value to 20 meters, hit enter, and then that's positioned that at 20 meters. The fact it says level 4 is because I had previous ones in here which I've just deleted, so I'll change that back to level 2, and then the next one should come in at level 3. So control key held down, click and hold, and let's just change that to 40. Notice the dimension, so I can snap to every 100 mil and then let go, and now that's changed to level 3, so it's just the one above that. That's all we need for these. So I've got 20 meters above there, 20 meters above this plane, and this is at 0. So the elevation under the level is set to 0. Okay, there's other ways of setting these values. Again, you can change it in this environment. So now if I go to my top view, so I'm just looking flat down on this, I want to create some sort of rectangular base on the base level. So before I do that, I'll just make sure that my level 1 is the active level, so just click on it. I haven't got to set the level. I used to have to do that in previous versions, but for the last couple of years we can just select the level, and that's made it the active level. And this has come around so the north is facing up, and then with my rectangle tool I'll just click and create something like a 50 by 50 base. Okay, now I want this to be central on this grid, so I can click in this one here and go 25, and I can click on this one. That's going to position that nice and balanced on the center. I don't really need to do that, but it's just handy to show you some of the other things that you can do with the temporary dimensions. Now I need to look at this next level, so I'll click on this. That's going to be my active level, and I can go back to my top view, and again I'll just whiz it back round and then create another rectangle. Let's go from the back corner down to, say, here, so I'll have 40 by 40 maybe, and click there. So it's going to slope away as it gets higher in that direction. And this time I'm not going to select the level, I'm just going to use my placement plane option up here, and I'll click level 3, and then I can click there, and let's make this 30 by 30. So there you go. So 30 by 30, 40 by 40, and 50 by 50 at the bottom. So let's just look at 3D, and we're now going to select these three squares, and just make sure we don't select any of the work planes. So with these three squares selected, we can then go to create form, and that's going to create sort of a very basic sort of shape for us. Now we are not over with our modeling at this stage. If we want to start manipulating this form, then we can do, and there are many ways to do this. You can either select the face, and the reason I can click on the faces is I've got this thing turned on down here, and I get this gizmo thing, as it's called. So with this little gizmo I can push and pull these surfaces, so I can pull that out that way. I could even pull it up in this direction, so that sort of creates all sorts of weird shapes, and I can pull it in this direction again, so it's creating sort of very uninteresting shapes as far as I'm concerned, but that's what you can do with it. So just Control Z to step back a few. I could also select the top surface and just drag that up a little bit, so that's going to pull it up, so this top surface is now away from this plane. And other things I can do are divide these surfaces up, or there's a node at the end, so I can again just move that up, and that's going to pull that corner up. So again, you can play around with these things to your heart's content. A couple of other things, if you want to create sort of a more interesting form whilst you've got the basics set, then if I just sort of hover over a surface and hit tab, so I've selected the whole thing, I can then, if I go to X-ray mode, you can start to see the nodes and the edges that drive this thing, and this thing here in the middle, which again pulls this form. I can do this, add edges and add profiles. If I add profiles, that's going to create a profile going up vertically. Okay, so even up to that sort of point. So I could add a couple of profiles there. Now click on add profile again, and add another one there. So what this allows me to do is just manipulate it at different levels. So these profiles, now I can tab in to these various elements. So I can select maybe just that grip there, if I can do it. Try and do it without selecting anything else. There you go, got it. And then you can start pulling these forms out. So again, you're creating, you know, more interesting or not shapes. I'm just going to step that back again. The other thing that we can do are create sort of divided surfaces from these. So if I select maybe this surface here, I'll just turn the X-ray mode off. So I'll hit tab, select it all, and then go to X-ray to turn it off. At the moment I've only got these individual surfaces. Now even though I can see the lines that I've put in, these surfaces are still as one thing. If I select this surface and then click on add edge, not profile this time, add an edge, then I can add an edge on this surface by just sort of hovering over it, sort of like so. This will in fact divide this up into two zones. So the profiles don't divide, but the edges do divide. So again, I'll add an edge to this face, so maybe one there and one there. So it gives me the opportunity for creating different types of mesh on these individual sort of zones. So with some of our divided surfaces, if I select one of these surfaces, then I can divide it up into a mesh. So I've got this little drop down. Every time you see one of these, it's always worth clicking on it, even if you don't understand what on earth it's doing, just to see what you get, because these are almost tucked away or hidden from view. If we click on that, then we see that we've got the default divide settings. So we've got 10 in the U direction and 10 in the V direction. So we could change that should we want to. On the divided path we've got 6 as the number. Now we haven't got a path in there, but that's what it would give us if we had one. So UV grids 10 and 10. What that means is, if I say cancel that, if I select this surface and then just clicked on divide surface, then I get 10 divisions in this direction and 10 in this direction. If I was to take more of a decent sized surface and divide that up, then you can see the grid is more evenly spaced, simply because I've got more distance going up there than I have going across. We also get options to divide them by the reference planes. And if I wanted to some sort of fancy arrangement on this, I can have reference planes going all over the place. But I'll just demonstrate what I mean by these reference planes. So let's take this, for example. Click on divide surface, and by default it changes it to this UV grid, but I can untick those, so I've got no U grid and no V grid. I don't have to have both of them on either, and I'll use this intersects list instead. And if I click on this drop down, I can use the intersect list, click on that, and I'll use level 2 and level 3 and then say OK. So that's going to divide that up into just the levels. Okay, so all it's given me is grids basically, so I can start to add content to. Now these grids, again, if I click on this one, you'll notice that the surface is highlighted. There's no pattern on there, because if I look over at the properties, it tells me there is no pattern associated. It's just a UV grid. But I could apply a pattern to this, from which I could nest a pattern-based curtain family. So with this surface selected, if I change it from no pattern to maybe hexagon, for example, then that's going to divide up this into a hexagon shape based on the grid. Now we can't see the surface at the moment because it's been turned off, because pattern's turned on, but if I turn them both on, we can see that the grid underneath it is arranging this hexagon shape. So if I wanted a tighter hexagon shape, then I would have to change the number in the X and Y direction. So I wanted it to be squished more in this direction. Then I'll be looking at my U grid, and instead of having 10, I could have maybe 30 and then apply that. So that's going to make it more squished in that direction. If I wanted more in the V direction, then maybe 20 in that. So we go for 20 there and hit enter, and then that's going to divide this up into a much sort of tighter mesh. So then you can imagine applying a family to this, which has all sorts of different properties, which allows us to then create sort of a structural grid to it, or a curtain system arrangement. Then all of that is possible within this software. There are other things which we aren't going to go into, but if you're interested in Revit and masses, then adaptive families are the things that you really need to concentrate on. And you'll often see adaptive families which are snapping to a grid. Now you can't see the grid nodes at the moment. So if I select this surface, we've got to make sure that surface pattern is turned on. If surface pattern is turned off, and then we go for surface representation here, and then another one of these little down pointing arrows. If I go to surface, then these are grayed out, okay, because there's no surface there, there's just the pattern. So I'll cancel that for a second and turn surface back on, and then go to my surface representation and go back over to the surface tab. Now I see that I can turn on the original surface and the nodes, and it's this thing that allows me to snap to these surfaces inside the project environment. So that's a really, really useful little function that you need to be aware of. Okay, so in this one, which has no pattern, it's just the UV grid, surface representation, I can turn the nodes on as well, so I could snap to that as well. So what does all this mean to us? Well, it means that this object, now when I load this into my project, can be turned into something else. Okay, these surfaces and these mesh patterns can all have things applied to them inside of the project. Not necessarily all of it, but we'll take it into the project environment and see what happens. So I'm going to load into project, and I'll just cancel out of that. So we get this little message that tells us that show mass has been enabled. To temporarily show or hide masses, select the masking site ribbon, so this one here, and then there's a show and hide thing. It just sits around about here somewhere. We'll keep that message available so it pops up every now and then we can close this down. So we are going to pick a plane, because we're in this elevation view. We need to pick a plane, so we'll go down to our level 0, and then we go OK, and we'll go to our floor plan, and now we can see this object. And notice that it's much bigger than the views. So if I click here, now be careful you don't keep clicking, because you need to go to modify, because basically cancel that as well, because basically we've placed the mass and it'll allow you to keep placing it until you are done placing it. So what I'm going to do is grab each of these markers and try not to grab this object, so I can just move the elevation markers away. I don't want to go in this way because I'll select it, so I need to just keep coming in from this side and move those, and then click on the node bit and stretch this out so that we can see the entire depth of the elevation. Okay, so there's a couple of things, those 33 reasons why you can't see something, these are some of them. So in 3D, this is what we've got in our project. Okay, it's pretty much the mass. It's nothing really at the moment. There's no surfaces or anything made from it. So when we come back in the next part of this massing reminder, then I'll show you how to create surfaces and floors from the project environment.